started the sweet potato breeding program in 2012. Can everyone hear me? No? Hello?
Yes.
Yes. I'll start again. So, my name is Valerio Pribobo, and I'm the vegetable breeder here at Vineland. I've been here for about 7 years, and one of my first priorities was to start a sweet potato breeding program back in 2012. So in the past 6 years, I've been working on sweet potatoes, and you can see behind me some of our trials. So these were planted, I would say, in late May. So here in Canada, we have to plant sweet potatoes by late May, early June. If it's any later, then you may not be able to harvest it in time. Otherwise, the cold starts to come up in October. It all depends on the season. Like this year has been a very hot season, so sweet potatoes really like the heat. So that really helps it come along. Actually, you could probably, if it keeps up like this, you could probably harvest sweet potatoes by the end of August. So this is a very good year. A typical year where you get hot and cold, you tend to harvest maybe mid-September, end of September, and you start getting into October where it starts to get cooler again. And then you run the risk of getting chilling injury in the sweet potatoes. So that's a big risk for the growers here in Ontario. Just some background on sweet potatoes. We import about 66,000 tons of sweet potatoes from the US annually. We have very small crop production here across Canada. Actually, most of it's here in Ontario, Southern Ontario, Simcoe. There is a little bit in Nova Scotia, but my goal is trying to expand production across Canada. So there is a little bit going on in Quebec, and now we're trying to expand to Manitoba and BC, where we have our trials using our new variety, Radiance. So hopefully we expand across Canada in the next couple of years. We did commercially release Radiance this year. So we had it grown on about 15 acres across Canada. And we hope that it does well. And next year we're prepared to supply about 150 acres worth of slips. So this is a slip. This is what growers buy, and they plant these. So you have to plant it about halfway, at least get 2 nodes in there, and the potatoes will develop off these nodes. So this is what the grower will buy. I'll talk about this a little bit in the next few minutes, just to tell you about a new industry we're trying to develop here in Canada. So just a little bit about Radiance. So our goal was to develop a variety that's adapted to Canada, which has a very short growing season. And so this variety actually bulks up very quickly here in Canada. Has a very short maturation date. It's about 105, 110 days. So that's ideal for a lot of growers here in Ontario, especially Ontario. If you can harvest it earlier, then a lot of retailers are trying to target that Thanksgiving market. So you need, and that's in mid-October. So they need to get it out of the ground by early September. Then there's a process called curing. So when you harvest a potato, the skin is very soft. It peels off with your thumb. So curing, what it does, it helps harden the skin on the potato, and that helps it preserve it for at least 8 months, even longer, depending on the variety and the way you store it. So after curing for about 5 to 10 days, so you need that time, and then you have to wash it, package it, and ship it out. It requires another 2 to 3 weeks. So you're getting close to October, but you need a variety that you can harvest earlier in order to hit that market. And so we're talking to a lot of retailers, especially Loblaws, and they require about 2 weeks in advance. So So it's kind of pushing it when you're using a variety that's a long season variety, like the commercial variety called Covington, which is probably what you find right now in the supermarkets. That was developed in the U.S., but it has a very long growing season. So the growers have been growing that for many years, but haven't been able to get it for Thanksgiving because it just takes too long to develop. But this variety is very early, and so it's possible for growers to harvest it earlier. So we have several growers this year that are testing radiance. They grow for loblaws, and so we'll see how things go this year with them. I think it'll go well because of the heat we've been getting, so this will really push it along. So the other thing I want to talk about is the slips. So as I mentioned, you need growers buy this to grow their sweet potatoes. Currently, there is no supply of slips in Canada. It's all coming from the U.S. So for this variety, for us to sell this variety, we have to develop a strategy on how can we develop this in Canada, because there is no supplier in the U.S. It's been developed in Canada, so we haven't licensed it in Canada, in the U.S. So it's something that we thought about developing here. So in the past couple of years, we've been developing the strategy on how to grow this in a greenhouse. Because Canada and we have to plant. So if you plant these, what they'll do is they'll sprout. So what we do is we use small potatoes. So if you look at the field over there, so this has been used to develop small potatoes that will be used to develop these cuttings in order for the growers to grow it this way. So it's a big supply chain, but this industry doesn't exist here. We had to come up with a strategy on how to do that, and it has to be done in a greenhouse, so it becomes more expensive compared to the US, where they actually do it outside because they can, because of the weather, the climate that they have.
Yeah.
So we've come up with a strategy, and we have a partner, Roland Farms. They were the ones that actually supplied the cuttings for Radiance this year on those 15 acres. Things have gone well. They've sold out all their slips. There's a high demand for it. So we're hoping that next year, using the potatoes that are developed in this field here, which will be shipped to them, and they'll be able to supply about 150 acres worth of Radiance next year to be shipped across Canada. So not only have we developed a variety for local production, Canadian production, but we've also targeted a slip industry, which will benefit existing greenhouse growers who actually supply ornamentals and different kinds of veggies to other growers. They can just add this on to their list because it's during a time when it's downtime, so they have empty greenhouses. So they can fill it in for about 3 months. That's all that's required to develop these for growers here in Canada. How much time do I have? Sounds good. Are there questions?
The slips, how long can they last from the time that they are
Cut?
cut?
3 days.
3 days, and then they gotta go in the ground.
Yes.
Okay.
But so it's 1 day to ship, and then they have 2 days to get it in, which is plenty of time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Growing a slip, for example. Potato this size, how many slips could you get from a potato this size?
5 to 10.
5 to 10.
Yes.
How would you force slips to come out of a potato this size? You were saying smaller potatoes for growing slips, something this size.
You can use any size. The reason we're using smaller potatoes is just we did a study to see what's the ideal potato size in order to get a high density, and the smaller potatoes gave the best density per square meter. The more you get per square meter, the lower the cost of production goes down. That's the reason. So you would get, I would say, 5 to 10 out of that.
And how would you force the slips to start?
You just plant it in soil and give it fertilizer and water, and it'll sprout. Heat, it needs heat. Yeah. You can do it at home.
I think this guy might be trying.
What's the idea of the hilling and the plastic plastic keeps weeds down?
Okay, good question.
Solarizing.
So what's the purpose of the plastic in the hills?
It warms up
Okay.
the soil.
So it's a good question. So here in Southern Ontario, the growers do not use plastic because they get enough heat units. It's very hot here. But areas like Nova Scotia, Quebec, now we're testing in Manitoba, and it looks like they will need plastic because it keeps the soil warm. And as I mentioned, sweet potatoes need a lot of heat, and that's the reason. The hilling is more about, so when you plant it's for the roots to develop in there nicely, because you don't want it to hit the hard ground, otherwise you get misshapen potato roots, yeah.
Can makers use your colon out of the soil, or do you have to?
No, you can, but if you're going to eat it right away, that's fine. There are some growers that ship right away without curing. The only reason for the curing is actually it's two reasons, sorry. One is to get long-term storage. The other reason is actually to give it more flavor, because as you cure it, it helps develop more sugars. It makes it sweeter.
How do you cure it?
So curing requires a 29 degrees Celsius, a high humidity. So you won't have this at home, but you can get a bucket of water, a little room, put a heater in there, get it to about 29, 30 degrees, and leave it for about 5 to 10 days. You can check the skin. If it doesn't peel off, then it's ready. It's cured. Yeah.
Wow. And they're on racks.
Production per hectare, I can tell you by acres.
Acres.
So acres, you get on average about 20,000 pounds, maybe more. Yeah. 25,000 pounds. It's more about 20,000 pounds. But the other thing you have to remember, there's different grades, so there's different sizes. So the growers will sort out by US #1, which is the ideal size. And then there's a smaller shape, like this would be a #2. And then there's very small one, or culls, very tiny ones that are just thrown out. So when you take all that factor all that in, you get maybe 90% is marketable, and the other 10% is just waste or can go to animal feed, but I don't think they get much money for that.
I'm just wondering, like, you have a runners already from this sweet potatoes. Can you use them as well, or why not?
Sorry, if you can
Cutting.
cut these
Yeah,
vines?
yeah,
Yeah, you can.
and it will. You can plant them.
Plant it and it'll, yeah, because I just took this off one of the tips. You can plant this and it'll grow.
So you don't need a small potato to grow. You can just start it from there.
You can, but growers will not do that. So, in order for the industry just to supply this, the method we are using is the small potatoes. The other reason we use the small potatoes is after a while, after a few years of just using the same thing over and over, what happens is the viruses start to build up in this material, and that decreases the yield of the potato. So we're using a virus indexing method where we actually clean up material so it doesn't have any viruses in it. We start from fresh material. So this material is actually virus indexed, so there aren't any viruses in the material, and growers will get high quality slips. Yeah.
Your 150 acres for next year, how do growers go about getting some of those slips for those 150 acres? Are they spoken for already, or what's the...
No, so when the time comes for the orders to come in, Rollins is ready to take those orders.
So it's a first come, first served type
Yes,
of thing.
so there was a waiting list this year, and unfortunately we don't have enough. Yes.
When it's time to harvest, how far out within between the rows would you find potatoes? Like, is it
No, it's right. It's right there. It's underneath. It goes straight down. They don't grow out.
In California, for example, they grow strawberries in boxes in the field. They're raised up and grow. Would that be an easier way of growing those potatoes? Would it be more warm for areas like in
I would think, isn't the soil will be more warmer during?
Yes.
Yes,
That's
but if you
that's
pull
my
it out,
thought.
it's not as warm.
You don't think? No, it's not as warm.
I don't think so. It's something to try, but I don't know if it's going to be more expensive if you have to buy boxes. It would all add to the cost and labor. I think this method is pretty easy because you sit on a planter and you just keep feeding these slips and you just keep going. But you know, that's something maybe to look into. So,
Oh,
so we're collaborating with Louisiana State University. So they have their own sweet potato breeding program in southern U.S. And so they've made a lot of cross pollinations to develop new seeds. So each seed is potentially a new variety. So we had asked for some seeds because we were just starting, and we didn't have the time to make the cross pollinations. So they supplied seeds that they've never tested before, and so we just in the first year was actually in that corner there, and that's where we first tested radiance, was in that corner. It was just a couple of plants of it because it was derived from one seed that they had. And so they're our collaborator, and they provided us with the genetic material to do it to start. And so we tested under our short season. So we knew that when you look at the potato in end of August, it was pretty big. So you knew that it did well under these conditions.